the past 2 decades, Roger Federer hasn't just been a tennis player, he's been an immortal icon, a god of perfection on the court whom every young player dared only to bow to from a distance. But on one suffocating afternoon in a press conference room, Jannik Sinner, a rising star with the burning flame of ambition, threw out a statement that hit like a lightning bolt. Federer was never my idol. That declaration was a sharp knife, cutting directly into Federer's eternal legacy. In an instant, it ignited a global firestorm. Millions of fans were furious. International headlines screamed, and social media erupted like a battlefield. But the real shock was yet to come somehow. This story dragged Rafael Nadal, the king of clay, into the vortex of controversy. Jannik Sinner, the 22-year-old with a fierce desire to dominate, suddenly became the world's enemy. But is the truth as simple as it seems? Did Sinner really dare to challenge the Federer monument? Or was this just a vicious media trap, orchestrated to ruin the career of a rising star? The secret behind this scandal of the century will be revealed in today's video. The press conference bombed. The press conference room was packed. Flashbulbs were popping incessantly, and the air was thick with anticipation. Jannik Sinner had just defeated a major opponent and walked into the small room where dozens of microphones were aimed directly at him. Everyone had a script ready. The red-headed prodigy would once again admit that Roger Federer was his idol, extending the tradition that so many young players had confirmed before the cameras. But then, the unexpected happened. From his parched lips after the match, Sinner let out a phrase that silenced the entire room. Federer was never my idol. In that moment, no one dared to breathe. A few reporters looked at each other, while others immediately started typing furiously on their keyboards. Just seconds later, the storm hit. The headline appeared on Twitter, flooded news sites, and erupted on fan forums. Betrayal of an idol, an ungrateful youngster to a legend, an arrogant young player with nothing to show, daring to deny Federer. Heavy accusations swarmed him, giving Sinner no chance to explain. That single phrase, just 4 words, became the tinder that ignited a fire, burning his image in the eyes of a large portion of the audience. What made people even more outraged was the stark contrast. In the world's eyes, Federer was a living saint of tennis, elegant, composed, and great. How could a young player who had just stepped into the spotlight dare to declare that he had never considered him an idol? The entire press conference room was in chaos. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others laughed mockingly, and some rushed out to send the hot headline to their newsrooms. No one cared if Sinner wanted to explain further. For the media, that phrase was more than enough to become the trigger. That very night, social media exploded. The hashtag #NeverMyIdol went straight to the top of trending topics. Clipped videos, harsh comments, and furious tweets flooded the platforms. Federer fans considered it an unforgivable insult. A small minority sided with Sinner, arguing he was simply trying to assert his individuality. But everyone agreed tennis had just witnessed one of the most shocking statements in years. And then a question began to haunt the entire tennis world. Why did Jannik Sinner dare to make that statement? Was it the truth, or was the story somehow twisted? Idol or shackles, the dark side of Federer's shadow. Before Jannik Sinner became the world's #1 star, before his name was associated with controversy, there was a red-headed boy quietly growing up in San Candido, a small town in the mountains of northern Italy. It was not a land of tennis, but a sanctuary of white snow, where long, steep slopes descended into valleys, and the sound of skis cutting through the ice became the soundtrack of his childhood. Jannik was once a promising skier, winning a national junior championship. In the eyes of his neighbors, the boy would pursue a career on the slopes, not on a tennis court. But everything changed when he picked up a racket. Tennis was initially just a side hobby, but it quickly consumed his passion. And it was then that Jannik met Roger Federer, not in person, but through a television screen. On cold winter nights, the family would huddle in their wooden house, the only light coming from a small TV. On it, a Swiss man with a forehand as fluid as a painting was sweeping through tennis courts around the world. The mountain boy stood silently, eyes wide, his heart pounding with every point. Roger Federer was my idol. Sinner later admitted many times, for him, Federer was not just a tennis player, but a symbol of perfection. His graceful movements, his elegant attire, his calm demeanor all created an image that any boy who just picked up a racket would want to emulate. An idol, to Sinner at that time, was not just a sports hero, but a distant dream. A picture hung on the wall to look at every morning and long for. However, an idol can also become a shackle. When an icon is too great, they no longer just inspire, they also unintentionally impose standards. The more Sinner trained, the more he heard relentless comparisons. That shot is beautiful, but is it as smooth as Federer's? Your style is calm, a bit like Federer's, but it lacks his charm, even when he was new to the ATP Tour. The media always had a ready-made mold for him to fit into. How would the new generation carry on Federer's legacy? That shadow weighed heavily, not just on Sinner, but on the entire young generation. Federer was so revered that he became the sole standard. Every young player was labeled a faulty Federer version if they weren't perfect enough. The idol, from a sweet dream, slowly turned into a curse that made people afraid to step out of line. Then in 2020, the opportunity came. Sinner was only 18, a promising name, but not yet influential enough. And then he was invited to Mallorca, to Rafael Nadal's academy, a place where every day of training was a battle for survival. If Federer was a distant image, then Nadal was present right before his eyes sweat, heavy breathing, and physically grueling training sessions. There, Sinner was no longer looking up at an idol through a screen, but directly learning from a living legend. After those training sessions, he made a statement that everyone would later dissect. Roger Federer was my idol, but since I trained with Rafael Nadal, he became a reference point for me. The sentence seemed simple, but it carried immense weight because it marked a shift. The childhood idol had fulfilled his purpose, and now he needed a more practical role model to guide his way. Federer was the dream, and Nadal was the experience. Federer was the painting, and Nadal was the vivid, living textbook right in front of him. However, that subtlety was overlooked. The media saw an opportunity to fan the flames. They chopped off the first half of the sentence, discarded the part, "was my idol," and only kept the most controversial fragment, "Federer was never my idol." In an instant, all the pent-up conflicts exploded. On one side were the admissions of an idol. On the other was a rebellious headline. On one side was the child who once looked up to Federer. On the other was the young player who wanted to escape the shadow. And the audience was left in confusion. What was the truth? After all, did Sinner truly have an idol? Or was it all just a facade created to please the public? Was the statement in Mallorca a sign of maturity or an act of denial? And if Federer was his idol, why, just a few years later, did Sinner become the center of a scandal denying him? That question had no immediate answer. It hung in the air, like a thread cutting through the past and present, leading directly to the next chapter where the name Rafael Nadal was not just a reference point, but a catalyst that turned a statement of maturity into the biggest scandal of Jannik Sinner's young career. Mallorca, Nadal, and the game-changing twist. If Roger Federer was a painting on the wall of Jannik Sinner's childhood, then Rafael Nadal was a real-life storm that swept through his adulthood. In 2020, while the whole world was in turmoil from the pandemic, Sinner, the 18-year-old, unexpectedly received an invitation to Mallorca, to Nadal's academy. Not everyone gets such a privilege to live, train, and absorb the spirit of one of the greatest warriors in history. There, every morning began early. Before the sun had even risen above the horizon, Sinner saw Nadal walk onto the court, his forehead already drenched in sweat despite only being in warm-ups. There was no leniency, no special treatment. Every player had to train to the point of exhaustion. And Nadal was the most exemplary of them all. The repetitive drills, the relentless hitting that made his biceps tense and his legs tremble. But instead of complaining, Sinner learned that patience was the key to surviving at the top. It was in Mallorca that Sinner spoke his heart, a confession both simple and profound. Roger Federer was my idol, but since I trained with Rafael Nadal, he became a reference point for me. There was no denial there. Federer was still his idol, the childhood hero, the role model who had planted the seed of desire. But Nadal, with his concrete and demanding presence, had become the reference point, a new anchor for Sinner to enter the real world. An idol is a distant dream. A reference point is a living textbook. An idol sparks love. A reference point shows the way to survive. However, the press didn't care about that nuance. They saw an opportunity to fuel a fire. They cut off the first half of the sentence, discarded the "was my idol" part, and only kept the controversial fragment "Federer was never my idol." In an instant, a statement of maturity was distorted into a rebellious declaration. News outlets hungry for sensational headlines immediately hailed the denial as proof of the young generation's rebellion. Tweets spread like wildfire, drowning out all explanations. Sinner, who only wanted to express gratitude to Nadal, was now labeled as ungrateful to Federer. The drama reached its peak when the Federer fan community reacted fiercely. They saw it as a direct insult, as if Sinner had drawn a line through the legend's legacy. Meanwhile, Nadal fans seized the opportunity, seeing this as evidence of Rafa's timeless greatness. One sentence, by accident, had been turned into a spark that ignited a war between tennis's two largest fan communities. For Sinner, it was a bitter lesson. He understood that the most important matches aren't just played on the court, but also in the press room. Every word, every detail could be cut, twisted, and turned into a weapon to stab him. The idol, once a source of naive inspiration, now became a battlefield of public opinion. And in that chaos, a new question emerged: did Sinner really choose to deny Federer to embrace the Nadal era? Or was it all a media trap, forcing him into the role of a rebel? Regardless, one truth became clear. The idol scandal wasn't just a personal misunderstanding, but also a symbol of an entire generation's rebellion. A generation that didn't want to perpetually bow before icons, but craved to break free from the shackles and write their own history. Sinner's shocking redemption. The media can turn a single phrase into a storm, but history only records victories. And Jannik Sinner, despite the shocking headlines, chose the only path to respond, conquering the summit. In 24, as the season reached its climax, Sinner consistently defeated formidable opponents, establishing his position as a cold-blooded conqueror. The peak was the moment he officially became the world's #1 tennis player. In that instant, the entire tennis world shook. No longer the skinny boy from the Italian mountains, Sinner had ascended to the throne, a position once held by Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic. And at that very moment, a bitter paradox was exposed. The person who had been labeled a rebel to his idol Federer was now sitting on the same chair the Swiss legend once dominated. But the drama didn't end there. When the news of Sinner becoming #1 spread, a message appeared from Roger Federer himself. It was brief, simple, and full of respect. Federer congratulated Sinner with his characteristic elegance, and Sinner, instead of avoiding it, publicly responded, "He has always been my childhood idol." This complete reversal stunned the world. A scandal once inflated in a press room vanished in just a few lines of text. But on a deeper level, the echoes still remain. Because no one can forget the headlines that once spread across the news: Federer was never my idol. It became a symbol of a chaotic era, where the new generation was forced to choose: either live forever in Federer's shadow, or accept becoming a rebel. And Sinner, though he never denied his admiration, became the face associated with that rebellion. In the end, perhaps the truth is much simpler. Federer was the idol, Nadal became the reference point, and Sinner turned both into a launching pad to ascend to the throne. There was no betrayal, only the maturation process of a generation. But the media always needs a more thrilling story, and they got it. Today, looking back, people no longer debate who Sinner idolized. What is mentioned more is how he rewrote history, from a boy in the snowy mountains to the tennis star who stands above all. A single phrase, when taken out of context, can shake the entire tennis world. Federer was never my idol never actually came from Jannik Sinner's mouth, but it became a sensational headline, fueling controversy and pushing him into a public storm. In reality, The truth is much simpler. Roger Federer was my idol, but since I trained with Rafael Nadal, he became a reference point for me. In that truth, we see a whole journey of growth. Federer was the idol of his childhood, a distant symbol on a screen. Nadal was the anchor in reality, a direct mentor, who taught him lessons in every training session. And Sinner, with his own courage, turned both legends into the foundation to build his own dynasty. Ultimately, this story is not about who you idolize. It is a reminder that every generation must find its own path to escape the shadow of the past. Sometimes, rebellion is just a young star's way of declaring, I don't want to live forever in someone else's legacy. I want to write my own. We are not responsible if you misunderstand or misapply this content. Please consider, verify, and receive with discernment. If you liked it, give it a like, comment, share, or subscribe to the channel. That is the fuel that allows us to tell more top-tier stories about other tennis superstars.